All right. Hi, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to our first ever National Rebates report out call. This is the first of a series that we're going to do every month. This is an opportunity for us to get everybody together and start sharing some specific updates. Before I hand things over to Courtney from NYSERDA to explain what's going on over there, just a couple of quick things from NASEO. Like I mentioned, we're going to have these update calls every month, an opportunity for us to share what we're hearing at the regional meetings, and also an opportunity for people to share specific updates. And so hopefully you all will be open to the idea of sharing some specifics with your fellow states. And to that end, we've got a quick poll for you, just to make sure we've got your interests correct about whether or not it would be okay for us to share specific updates. And we're talking about particularly launch dates so that we can make sure that everybody's informed, but some specific program design ideas as well. I'm going to turn things over to Alana to start that poll. And as she's doing that, Alana is the newest member of our team. So while people are voting, Alana, would you like to introduce yourself?
For sure. Yes. So as Maddie already introduced me, I'm Alana, and I am the new residential buildings coordinator at NASEO. So I'll be working alongside Maddie and Sandy for the most part concerning home energy rebates and home energy labeling. But I am a recent graduate from the University of Virginia. So that's kind of where my previous step was pre-NASEO, but very excited to be here. Yeah.
Thank you. And we'll continue to let folks vote. Again, this is just to share among states. If it's okay to share program design details, launch dates in these national update calls as we learn about them during our regional meetings. And let's see, well, if it looks like we've got, oh, it looks like we've got everybody answered. So Alana, whenever you're ready to close the poll and start sharing slides, we'll move on to the regional meeting report outs. And so Courtney, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, I think some people may be joining the Teams. There was a Teams link in the meeting invitation, because I know I did that and I just saw it pop up on my screen. Someone else trying to get in.
Okay, thank you for letting us know. I hate how Outlook defaults to having Teams messages. That's so annoying. Okay. So let's go to some of the themes from the regional meeting report outs. So we'll save sort of like the program design decisions and first share a little bit about other content that's coming up. You guys who pay close attention to the NASEO website, like some of you do, know that there's been an influx of RFPs being posted and therefore RFPs being closed the last couple of weeks. I also wanted to mention some discontent maybe about the delay of TREC awards being made. So that may have some impact on program design. Otherwise, some topics that have come up that I'm willing to bet Courtney's going to cover in her remarks is the use of retail channels, engaging with utilities. Let's see, open up my notes here. Coordination with the tribes has come up, particularly in the Southwest. And if there's any states on the line and that you think we could be helpful bringing in DUE to facilitate some of those conversations, let us know. And we're happy to get the Office of Policy at DUE to make some introductions so that you guys can start scheduling those. Some other issues that have come up are market transformation and how to define market transformation. And then how to consider, and then the continuation of affordability. Two last quick things from DOE that I want to make sure folks are aware of. Consumer Bill of Rights was published. If you haven't seen that, I'll put a link in the chat so that folks can check it out. And then also might have heard, came up end of last week, some new anxiety being raised about Davis-Bacon. Confirmed with DOE today that they have no intention on changing rebates to suddenly require Davis-Bacon. So we're clear there. It's actually FAQ number 18 if folks want to check it out. Davis-Bacon does not apply to these rebates. So I think I've taken enough time with announcements. I'm going to hand things over to Courtney to tell us all the great stuff that's happening in New York. And then after she does, we'll have time for discussion. So Courtney, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. And I do have some slides I could show if you can give me control.
Sure.
Or I can just talk.
We'll make you a co-host, and so hopefully you'll be able to share your screen.
Well, oh, there it is.
Okay.
Found it. Okay, here we go. All right. So I'm going to take you on a whirlwind tour of everything that we've been juggling here. And I'm just going to dive right in and happy to take questions either as I go along or afterwards. And I'm been fighting a cold and a cough, so I'm hoping that the cough kind of stays subdued for now. So just a snapshot, you guys are probably all familiar with your own version of this, but just to give you some sense of scale of what we're dealing with here in New York, our full allocation of the formula grant between the two programs is $317.7 million, with it's just about $158 million going to the HERE program and $159 million going to her. And so what we've been starting to do to socialize with some of our stakeholders is making sure that they do understand that that's not all rebate money. And just kind of get people a little bit familiar with like what's really going to be available to consumers in the market is less than those total amounts. So that's kind of what this slide is about. Some of the things that we've been focused on, and again, like some of these slides are meant for like socializing some of these ideas with our stakeholders. And in particular, we've been in recent conversations with the utilities and with the Department of Public Service. And so kind of really hammering home the fact that this funding is not intended to be a replacement for any existing program funding in the state, whether it's coming from a local source or from ratepayer money, that we're not meant to be replacing or supplanting that money. We're meant to supplement it with the federal funds. We are really trying to lean into being able to serve customers statewide, which is something that is sort of true in New York, but not completely true in New York for any other programs that we have. Our ratepayer funds do go into a centralized fund, but it serves everybody except for the ones that we have in municipal electric territories. We use RGGI, Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative funds, to help fill the gap on those. But then we, for some reason that I can't explain, we treat Long Island as if it's an entirely different country. Because it's an island. So Long Island, we do try to coordinate and collaborate with Long Island LIPA PSEG as much as we can, but it's not as directly connected as the other work that we do under our Clean Energy Fund directly. So it's a little bit of a challenge for us. It's one of the challenges for NYSERDA to run a full statewide program, is that we have to both knit together funding sources, and we also have to coordinate with some of these other partners that aren't necessarily under the same umbrella of rules. We are trying to coordinate, like I said, we're one of our last ones across the finish line is really making sure that we've got things locked down on how we're going to be interacting with the utility programs that are in market, and making sure that the Department of Public Service is fully on board with our strategy there. So we're kind of hot and heavy in some of those negotiations right now. So some of what I'm going to say today is not completely landed yet. Some of the other challenges that we've been facing, and I'm sure you guys are discovering this as well if you haven't already, a lot of the federal rules and guidance have been a bit of a moving target. Not only are they complicated, but they keep changing. And I'll just say, my personal kind of observation is there's a bit of overreach in a lot of places, where maybe the intent of the law is being in my opinion, over-interpreted by DOE, kind of fully recognizing their obligation to protect these public funds from being spent appropriately, and making sure that we're protecting consumers against in the money itself against fraud and abuse. But like, there are some places where it's just making things a lot more complicated for us when we already run these programs and it is our day job to do so. It'd be nice to have a little bit more leaning into what the states are already doing or what the local programs are already doing. Yeah, so all of that to say, some of these requirements are making things a little bit overly complicated for us, which we're continuing, as much as we try to keep things simple, we are finding it increasingly complex, particularly as we try to reach all elements of the HERE program and then layer in the HER program as well, which both obviously function under very different sets of rules and strategies and objectives, frankly. We are looking to coordinate our programs to maximize the impact of the funding. And so we really had to kind of do some soul searching on what that really means and try to understand, like, how far can this money really go? This $300 million sounds like a lot of money, but at the end of the day, in a state where we have something on the order of 8 million dwelling units, it doesn't really go that far. So we have to really think about, and I think, like you said, Maddie, like, we're trying to figure out how do we take a fairly small amount of money and try to point it in a direction that it leads us to some sort of material market transformation steps. And how do we make sure that we don't burn too hot and run through the money so fast that it's sort of gone in a flash and people are upset and disappointed, and that we don't really have a chance to get sort of the flywheel spinning on any kind of market transformation. So we figured the best that we could try to plan for is to try to plan for a 3-year runway for spending this money. And it is taking a lot of strategy and strategic thinking to try to figure out, how do we do that? How do we really manage these funds in a way that we'll be able to stretch them to be available for 3 years? The process we've been going through, a very robust stakeholder engagement process. We have had, I don't even know how many meetings. Somewhere we have a tally of all the meetings and all the different stakeholders and head counts on all the meetings. And it's like literally thousands of people and dozens of meetings that have happened of various sizes. And we've done a variety of things to kind of make sure that we're trying to communicate as transparently as possible, and seeking input and feedback. And it's a little bit of a challenge to kind of walk that line between, like, we want to hear what you have to say, but everybody has to understand we can't co-design with everybody. We have to get this thing out the door at some point. So that's been a challenge of sort of setting expectations in the right place. And we're sure, people are going to continue to be disappointed that we can't engage with them as deeply as they would like, but it's just sort of the nature of the beast if we ever want to get this thing into market. So that's that. I'm going to take a drink here. Hold on just a second. So one of the things we did with this stakeholder engagement process is we divided up to kind of different levels of engagement to different types of stakeholders. And so that's kind of what this chart is showing, is some of the different kinds of ways that we've engaged with our stakeholders. So everything from the work groups, we've got a couple of groups we set up, one with contractors that currently work single family programs, with our community partners that work through we have something that we call our Energy Equity Collaborative. And it's a group of community representatives from different kinds of community groups where we, in fact, compensate them for their time to participate in the meetings with us. And each one of those are they're smaller groups, and we've been bringing them in on kind of a repeated basis. I think we've met with them 2 or 3 times with each group to kind of do deep dives into specific topics that are relevant to those groups. And we were able to do one in-person meeting where we brought the community partners and the contractors together into one room. We did some breakouts, and then we brought them together. And that was actually pretty interesting to get those groups to interact with each other, because they don't always quite have a good understanding of what the challenges are to the other, the person on the other side. So those brought some pretty interesting conversations to light. And then you'll see we have just a range of other kinds of levels of engagement. We've used roundtables pretty successfully with the retailers and manufacturers, which are a little, they're structured discussions, but kind of one-offs. It's almost like a work group, but like a one-off of a work group. And then there have been some one-on-one discussions as well. And then kind of working all the way up to, to date, we've had one fully public webinar that we held back in early December, where we had, I think we had 1,000 people register for it, and we had like 800 or so show up for it. So it was pretty largely attended. And then we just posted the recording online so people could go back to it. But I think we're due for one more public meeting, similar to the one we did back in December, to bring people up to date on where we are now. The utilities, we started some meetings with them earlier in the year. So we've been holding individual meetings. We have what we call joint management committees with our utilities. So we've got one that focuses on our low and moderate income programs, and another one that focuses on our heat pump, or what we call New York State Clean Heat program. And so we started by meeting with those 2 groups. And really the key right now that we're working on is trying to figure out the coordination between the heat pump rebate program that the utilities run, and how that's going to overlay when we roll out the HERE rebates in this first tranche of money that we're going to be deploying very soon, which I'm going to get to in just a minute. So the single family heat pump coordination has sort of taken the priority here, but we've already started the work streams also to coordinate with the multifamily program called AMEP that the utilities run, as well as trying to create some retail channels, which is going to be a whole other effort, a whole other can of worms. So timeline-wise, you may have heard we were officially awarded our first round of money. And so the way that, in case anybody wasn't tracking on that announcement, we applied for a partial scope implementation of the HERE program only. And that application went in the end of December. It was approved for funding in April, a few weeks ago. And the way that worked is that DOE made it public that the full $158 million had been obligated to New York State. So basically it's kind of set aside and earmarked for us, but we only really have access to the first tranche of money, which is the first 25% of the funding. So with that, combined with the early admin funds that we had already been awarded, it's a total of $39 million that's currently available to us until we hit the first set of milestones associated with that first tranche of money, and then they'll release the second tranche of money. But as it's been explained to me, it's important that they're able to say that the full amount has been obligated to the state. So then it kind of like lowers the risk that anybody can potentially come in and claw that money away. Other big milestones coming up is actually getting into market with that first early partial scope proposal. My team is fast and furious working right now to be in market in early June. So stay tuned, announcement coming soon. I'm looking at my calendar every day and realizing how fast that's coming. So how are we doing this? We want to leverage our existing programs as far as we can take them. So on the 1 to 4 single family side of the equation, we have our Empower Plus program, which is our LMI program, and And so we serve up to 80% AMI customers through that program. And then Cover Home is a program that we started as really as a pilot to demonstrate some different methods of doing envelope improvements and kind of framing them as heat pump ready packages or load reduction packages for homes, getting them ready for heat pumps to be installed. And it just happens that the way that we designed it and structured it actually kind of fits fairly well into what HER is calling for in terms of having like a whole house energy calculation that we can use to determine the level of incentive that's allowed. So Comfort Home serves the non-LMI community with that kind of load reduction strategy. So we're going to kind of stretch that and fit the HERE rebates for the 80 to 150% median income group into our Comfort Home structure because our Empower Plus isn't really designed for anybody that's not below 80% median income. So we've got to make some adjustments because Comfort Home wasn't really designed to be an equipment rebate program. But we're kind of figuring it out how we're going to do that and layer that into the heat pump ready packages that we already have in that program. In the first partial scope deployment, that's only going through Empower Plus, we'll be only focusing on the less than 80% of AMI. And we decided we're not including the heat pump clothes dryers and the cooking appliance rebates, at least in this first phase of deployment, only because they weren't existing measures in our systems and we really didn't have a process for fulfilling them. So we decided to sort of kick that down the road a little bit, but we are planning to offer them at some point later in the year. The heat pump installations, this is the big one that's up for debate right now. We are very close, I think, to landing a strategy with the utilities on how we can sort of combine our efforts in that space and allow people to take advantage of both the Clean Heat program and the HERE program. But we're still negotiating with Department of Public Service to make sure that they're comfortable with the way that we're approaching that. And that's really just for the below 80% of AMI part of the market. We still are going to have to go through another negotiation on how we do the 80 to 150, which is probably going to look different. Leveraging our existing infrastructure, we currently have a network of about 200 contractors or so that fairly actively participate in our programs. I think as with most programs, you know, it's probably a quarter of them that do the majority of the work. But we do have pretty close to 200 that do some projects every year. And then the other big thing is really taking a look at all of our IT and data and workflow systems and making sure that they can support these programs. It's fairly complicated, even though we tried to keep it as simple as possible. And we've actually been in process on updating these systems very recently. So we're in a better position now to be able to adapt and bring new programs in than we were a couple of years ago. But even with that, we're still finding like it's pretty complicated with these programs. And also, I don't know how many of you have been dealing deeply with PNNL and the tools that they're building, but we are finding like as much as we appreciate the help and support, we're also finding that to be a little bit of a moving target. And like there's some uncertainty as to when some of the APIs are going to be ready, and it's hard for us to build if we don't know what we're building to. So we've got a little bit of a chicken and egg problem happening here with some of this IT work that needs to happen. And then I guess I only just heard this from my staff the other day, but just recently, they also issued some new requirements for data that they're going to be looking for on the HER program, which I was not anticipating at all, that they were even going to be asking for that kind of data, like the data inputs that go into the models. So we're going to be looking very closely at that and trying to understand, like, is that actually a value add? Is there really a good reason for that? And possibly pushing back on that if it seems like it's just extra work that's not really adding more value. Some of the changes that we need to make to our existing programs, we need We are making some adjustments to the incentive levels for the 60 to 80% of median income to align with the HERE offers. And actually with HERE, we're going to be able to, in some cases, 100% fund some of those projects. We already fund this below 60% median income at 100% whenever we can. But up to date with the 60 to 80, we've limited it to 50% of the total project cost. And we think with the HERE, when we layer that in, we'll be able to pay up to 100% and get more projects done. Because this is a space actually where we're finding that we've had declining participation for a few years now, and we're looking for ways to boost participation in the 60 to 80% median income bracket. We will, because of that, we have a fixed pricing schedule that we use with our contractors for the below 60% of median income, and we're going to introduce that to the 60 to 80% bracket as well. So we'll be working out of the same kind of, it's not completely fixed pricing, but it's kind of like a fixed pricing schedule for some of the key measures that are installed, just to keep everybody kind of on the same level and make sure, you know, add some protection that these incentives aren't driving up the project costs. We've added the contractor incentive for working in DACs, and we're also trying to encourage deeper retrofits all at once. So in some cases, we've had contractors who will sort of like do a partial project because they want to max out the incentives, and then they come back 3 years later and they do another project at the same house. And we're trying to encourage them instead to look at it in terms of like, what's the full scope of everything that the house needs, and how do we get it done now in one transaction versus like doling it out over multiple years, as long as that's something that the homeowner can do. We did have a geo eligibility for income verification pilot that we had been running for a while, and we were actually just about to expand it in January when we learned from DOE that they would not allow us to use it. So we had to cancel that. So that was actually a big change of direction from where we thought we were headed, which has really made some of our stakeholders very unhappy. But it was either that or don't have the money. So Comfort Home, again, we've got to think about how we add in some of these mechanical system improvements along with the load reduction packages that we've already been offering. And then we're also kind of trying to figure out like what's the sweet spot for like an incentive level that'll really kind of get people motivated to do this work. And we're still playing with that. And this last bullet is maybe a little bit of inside baseball. This is about how we blend some of the funding streams that we already get, and how do we make sure that when we incentivize a heat pump, or when we put incentives towards a heat pump, that we're making sure that it goes into a home that we've deemed to be kind of heat pump ready from the envelope perspective. So we've created a set of criteria for what we expect to see in terms of levels of insulation, air leakage rates, and making sure that the home is going to be able to comfortably take on a heat pump and keep the homeowners comfortable, because we have a very old housing stock. So we have a high risk in our state if we just drop heat pumps in without checking the envelopes first, that people are going to be unhappy and cold. So we want to avoid that.
Courtney, you got a question in the chat that I think might just be a clarification question, which is on the Comfort Home program. You mentioned adding a custom or contractor incentive. Was that the IRA contractor incentive that you're adding, or something else?
Yeah, so we're trying to be consistent across the board. So we had the IRA has the $200 DAC incentive. And so we're trying to be consistent and just offer that across the board through all of our programs. And then for the installation incentives, we also sort of devised a proposal to DOE that we apply those for both so that would go across both Empower Plus and Comfort Home, and that was something that didn't previously exist in Comfort Home. I think that answers the question.
I think so. Thanks.
This is just an example. This is a very rough kind of doing these theoretical stack ups is really challenging, especially when we have comprehensive projects that we're thinking about. But this was just like a really rough way of representing what adding the $14,000 in here rebates might mean to, you know, a program like what are your what has it changed the potential for project caps? Typically we've operated our Empower Plus program at a $10,000 cap per project with our the money that we get through our ratepayer funding. And occasionally we've had other sources of funding that we could layer in with that, but we kind of operate on that $10,000, which is why, as I mentioned, a lot of times if it's a bigger project or a home that needs a lot of work, a contractor might look at trying to kind of dole it out into multiple projects over time, which is just not ideal because a lot of times they'll end up doing things like seal and insulate the attic, but not the walls, and wait 3 years to come back. And like, that's just not good building science. So we'd rather see them get it all done at once. So we're really hoping that this HERE money is going to allow us to essentially, you know, have a bigger cap for these projects that really need it, so we can get all that work done all at once. The other big one, which I know is big for everyone, is having access to the money to help pay for some of the electrical improvements, right? Because we currently don't really have a lot of money for that. So with that, that would bring our total cap, you know, total possible cap for low income or below 60% of, it'll be AMI now. In our case, we currently use SMI, which will be another change that we have to implement. So maximum possible rebate, $24,000 for those that are in the below 60% category. And then when we go 60 to 80, we'll maintain our current $5,000 per project cap out of our standard ratepayer funding pools. But then when we add in the HERE money, that will potentially bring those projects up to $19,000 being available to them. And this is a very simple presentation of how that works. But in reality, because we get funding from so many different sources, and they all kind of need to be spent on different timelines, and they all have their own little different sets of rules associated with it. We actually have a very complicated calculator that sits inside of our systems, that when we have a project identified and we have the rebate levels determined, then it goes in and it actually allocates funding out of any given source, and prioritizes the sources that need to be spent first. So even though we're seeing across the board, we could go to 24,000 and 19,000, we may be pulling that money out of a variety of different pots, in fact, for any given project, to make this all work. So we have this little tool that we call CFAST. It's our funding allocation selection tool. But it literally manages 38 different funding codes and all in this really complicated logic. So these rebates are going to go right into that logic and make it even more complicated. And then just kind of quick on I wanted to just acknowledge that we also have a whole team that's working on a multifamily strategy. We've been mostly focused on, really getting the 1 to 4 out the door. But we also are very actively working on our full scope applications. We're in one of the cohorts that's scheduled to deliver our full applications on June 14th. So that's another work stream that my team is working actively on. And then we've got our multifamily team. And what they're looking at doing, the way that they're proposing to do things is to provide an overarching umbrella kind of gateway into the program. So an application, a website, kind of landing page where people can kind of come in and sort of figure out what's the best option for them. And then they've got a couple of different kinds of program offers that they want to lean into. One is more performance-based and one is more of a prescriptive type of model. but kind of use this as a tool for people to kind of come in under the umbrella of like a single kind of branded point of entry that will then help guide them to the place where they're going to get the best offer based on, what the particular needs are of that building. And of course, what the income levels are of the residents in the building. So kind of similar to on the single family side, we're looking to leverage as much of the existing program infrastructure as we can, that we already have in place. So that includes not just like program policies and procedures, but also the contractor and service provider networks that are already in place, and really leaning into those guys to help coordinate with utilities, in those projects that would qualify for both utility funding and for IRA funding, kind of lean into the service provider network to help guide those building owners through that process. And then there's also a bunch of work to do again on the IT and workflow system part of the process here. And on our multifamily side, that's a little less developed than it is on the single family side. So we have a lot of work to do there. A couple of barriers that we've identified that we have brought to DOE's attention, but would certainly appreciate reinforcement from other states. We find that the Energy Star certified equipment requirement is a non-starter for buildings that have any kind of central systems in them for heating and hot water. They just don't exist. There's no such thing as an Energy Star certification for a system. As long as DOE maintains that requirement, we won't be able to provide these rebates for heat pumps and water heaters with central systems in the building. And we have communicated that to DOE. The other thing that we've been raising repeatedly and hoping to get some relief on is the income verification of 50% of households. Is, in our experience, extremely difficult unless you're only working with buildings, that by definition are low income because it's regulated housing. So we are pushing back on that and seeking some relief to that 50% threshold. Our current program only requires 25%. I don't know if they're going to meet us there or not, but we're putting it out there. And then we're also sort of trying to figure out how to deal with mixed use buildings, because we do have a lot of those particularly in New York City, that we need to contend with, and we haven't quite figured out a clear path for those yet.
Another quick clarification question for you. You all have not submitted an application that includes multifamily yet.
Correct. That'll be in the June 14th submission. Yeah. And then the same goes for having a retail point of sale option. This is another one that's been giving us a lot of headaches, is trying to figure out, like, is there even a viable path to deliver like a true person walks into a store and goes to the counter and gets a retail rebate on their appliance processed right then and there. We're finding DOE did issue some relief on this fairly recently, where they curtailed the requirement for post-installation photographs. So that was actually a good step in the right direction, but there's still a lot here that is not really standard in a retail rebate program that like a utility might run. Usually they keep those transactions fairly simple, and we are finding like this is pretty complicated stuff that we're being asked to do with these retailers, and then like multiply that across how many dozens of retailers that all have their own systems and their own rules and their own legal departments. And we're really finding this very challenging to figure out. So we have simplified our thinking to really focus on just the appliances right now. So we're really focused on figuring out a path to be able to deliver the heat pump clothes dryers and the cooking appliance rebates, at least through this retail channel, with sort of putting a pin in heat pump water heaters for the moment, and pushing everything else kind of out there you know, we probably won't be pursuing, air sealing insulation and ventilation. And we probably won't be pursuing heat pumps. We did consider it for a while, and we're finding it's a pretty tough one to figure out how it would actually work and not create a lot of risk. So we're still grappling with this a little, and some of what we're bumping up against is things when you start really getting into the details of trying to figure out how this is really going to work. You realize pretty quickly, like, it's a heavy lift to get these retailers to change anything in their systems, let alone change what their associates on the floor do in their day-to-day work. So there's maybe an opportunity through like the associates who do things like kitchen design, or like there's some of those sort of opportunities where it's more of a designed process that this appliance is sort of getting stuck into. In those cases where it's a little more hands-on with the person in the store, there might be an opportunity. But even with I talked with some of our utilities that are currently doing retail heat pump water heater rebates to see what their experience has been, and it's really a mixed bag. Some of them have found some fairly good uptake if they just like literally leave a coupon book, so to speak, or a QR code that the associate can kind of just like point the customer to click on that themselves, but it's an after the fact rebate. So it doesn't really fit into this point of sale model. Anything beyond that requires them to go in and like program in their systems that the rebate is tied to the SKUs for the equipment. And as you can imagine, like that opens a whole new can of worms to try to implement that with every retailer. So I'll be honest, say like we're still struggling with this, and we haven't figured it out completely yet. So we are going to put it into our application that we want to try to pursue this, but I'm not sure where or when it's going to land. But we're definitely interested in what other states' experiences might be and working with the retailers if they have any creative thoughts on how to solve for that. And then I think just last but not least, I want to give you an idea of scale. And when we mapped out what this would look like on kind of this is longer than a 3-year trajectory here. Very roughly speaking, and this distribution could shift around a lot depending on where the uptake happens. But we're kind of ballparking, and this is aligned with some of our original thoughts when we first started looking at the numbers. We were thinking maybe we could touch somewhere between 30 and 50,000 homes with this money. If we're really smart in how we distribute the funding and sort of, only spend it where we need it, and don't like max out every home with the maximum, we're thinking we may be able to get to 50 or 60,000 units touched, but it's a good number, but out of 8 million dwelling units, it's not a lot. It's a drop in the bucket. But that's the reality. So I think that was mainly what I wanted to show folks today, but happy to take questions if there's other things you want to know about.
Yeah, thank you. If folks have questions, I've got the chat open if you want to just put them in there and I can relay them. Otherwise, if you turn on your camera or raise your hand, I'll take that as you wanting to add something in. So there's a question in here back from when you were covering multifamily, if DOE had a response to your comments about the Energy Star requirement for heat pumps.
So I did have a conversation where I was told that was a misinterpretation and that it wasn't supposed to be that way and that it was going to be fixed, but I haven't seen it fixed yet.
Interesting. Alrighty, so another question You mentioned that a contractor can enroll at any time. Are you requiring them to be trained in program specifics first?
Yeah, so we currently operate our programs with an open enrollment process. So we do have a whole onboarding process. So, first we have to verify that they actually have the credentials and the technical skills and experience to do the work. So like if we require a BPI certification or whatever other credentials we might ask for, we make sure they have that ahead of time. But then there is like a whole onboarding process where they have to go through the program rules and sign on to the participation agreement, and then they go through kind of a probationary period where we have higher oversight on them until they really get their first like 5 projects under their belts.
Amy, thank you for reminding me of the rumors that slightly revised guidance coming July. You put July-ish, which I agree, July-ish. So in case folks on the line haven't heard those rumors, there are in fact rumors.
Yeah, which is super fun for us since we're trying to get into the market in June.
Yes. Yeah, Amy, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks for your presentation, Courtney. I'm Amy from the state of Washington. On that contractor qualification, is the 5 inspections of a project, did that already exist in your program in terms of like working with a contractor? Are you doing virtual inspections? I'm just curious how DOE requirements might change what was standard practice already for you all.
Yeah, so actually I think our standard practice was already a little more robust even than what DOE is requiring. So in this particular case, for quality control, quality assurance, we try to get a 10% sample of inspections done, actual field in-person inspections done by contractor. The ones that have smaller numbers of projects, it's a little different if they've got 1,000 projects versus 10 projects, right? But yeah, our standard practice has been for some time now that we do full inspections on their first 5 projects. And then as long as those go okay, then they kind of migrate over to the 10% sampling. But if anything starts to show up as a pattern that we don't like in their QA results, then we kind of bump up the level of sampling until we see it come back down or see the scores improve.
Anyone else want to jump in with a question? As folks are thinking, I'm going to ask Courtney about workday transformation. And if you all have a particular vision that you're orienting your programs towards.
Yeah, good question. I would say I'm not sure we have a fully gelled vision of where we're headed. We've tossed some ideas around for sure. We did have that kind of soul searching on like, if we really want to kind of say that we've had any impact on market transformation in any way, we have to be in market for some period of time that's longer than 5 minutes. And just like for context, like my programs gave out $156 million in incentives to consumers last year, just on the 1 to 4 side. So like, yeah, we could burn through this money really fast if we wanted to. So I think that was step 1, was just sort of level setting internally and sort of reaching that strategic agreement that let's see if we can design this so that the money will be available in the market at some level for about 3 years, give or take. And hoping, maybe more money will come and we'll be able to extend it, or maybe not. We don't really know. And then in our case, we also are gearing up towards, we have a new round of our Clean Energy Fund coming up that'll start in 2026. So part of this work is sort of also setting us up in the right direction so that with the the things that we've been ordered to do by the Department of Public Service and Public Service Commission, starting in 2026, still being negotiated out a little bit, but we do have a vision of where we think they want us to go. So we're trying to sort of design for that future as well. And that would extend into 2031. So I'm not sure that that's really market transformation, but it is like trying to manage the market and like make sure that this money is like leading up to the next round of funding. And then some of the thoughts that we've been having and some of the kind of short way that I've been answering that question, like to our board, is by sort of indicating that, like, obviously, if we're only going to touch 60,000 homes, we're not going to have this massive market transformative like thing happen, right? But we do know that there's some really big barriers to some of the electrification efforts that we're trying to get underway in decarbonization. And I think that there's enough here to get us to a place where we can overcome some of those barriers, like get people more familiar with heat pump equipment, with induction cooking, get the contractors more familiar with it, get the contractors used to installing it and understanding like which equipment to pick for which kinds of projects. So I think we can use it in that way to help overcome some of those initial key barriers that we have, and just like overcoming some of the unfamiliarity that the market currently has with some of these technologies and some of these strategies that are oriented, and just the idea of electrification itself, right? Like getting some good case studies under our belts that we can point to say, hey, like we did this here and it really worked and you can do it too. Like, I think that's going to be our sweet spot for being able to say that we had some influence on market transformation with this level of funding.
Thanks. I'm gonna keep asking questions unless folks if anyone wants to chime in, please do. With a launch maybe happening very soon, are there any like splashy announcements we should be looking out for, bracing ourselves for, etc.?
Oh, I'm not supposed to talk about that.
You can ignore me. You can ignore me.
But maybe.
Okay, great.
There could be something happening in a couple of weeks.
Okay. Maybe we'll get answers from someone else then. Who is allowed to talk about it. Any other questions from the group? Anyone want to chime in? If not, we can wrap up a little bit early. All right, everyone is looking pretty quiet. So we'll wrap up a few minutes early. Thanks, Courtney, for sharing. If it's okay with you, I will share the recording with states that couldn't make it today, but I won't post it anywhere. Otherwise, if folks have questions, any thoughts, you can follow up with me, and we're happy to answer, share thoughts, etc. All right, thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and I'm sure we'll talk to all of you soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.